This is organized by this new Institute of Global Reconstitution. I will say a few words about it. Of course, the title is double. We will be talking about politics and nature at the same time, which is not such a rare combination these days. Nevertheless, we are interested in this more profound and subversive side of both the constituent power and the constituent powers of nature. So I'll just say a few words of intro, and then my dear colleagues here in the panel will also say a few words. So the current crisis, we wrote in our description that it is polycrisis. It's like global crisis. There is always a crisis, but today there are indeed several emergency developments, and this crisis raises indeterminacy and turbulence. The international political order today is rooted in two contradictory conditions of legitimacy: the status quo and the national self-determination. This contradiction creates the crisis. Similarly, the relationship to nature is based on a double bind between managerialism and the reverence to this nature, or fear, which is the same. The concern for the other in nature is inseparable from the concern for its change that is catastrophic for humans, not for nature. These contradictions produce a state of emergency, as I said, and thus remind us that in both cases, politics, like nature, there is actually an older tension between the rational order of natural law and also an arbitrary, lawless force that creates the very structures of both politics and nature, and that transpires at a moment of danger. In the Middle Ages, this distinction between the lawless forming force and the actual natural law was formulated as potentia absoluta and potentia ordinata. It was first formulated in the 13th century by William of Auxerre and then widely used, but Duns Scotus and other nominalists, well, to be precise, like the nominalists who followed after Duns Scotus, gave it a new meaning of the power, God's power, being able to go against his own laws, and thus against natural law, so basically to create miracles. In this sense, constituent power and nature seem opposed by definition. Constituent power, potentia absoluta, is something that goes against nature, against the natural law. It's a higher law. But the Renaissance notion of natura naturans finds in the nature itself a source of potential lawlessness and formlessness. So there is a mirror development there. Nature, like law, is normally understood as something predictable, but then it also can mean a superior and unpredictable power. So there is this potentia absoluta somehow makes it into the nature itself. It becomes immanent. So today, law and nature, in both of their shapes, seem again to oppose each other. Nature, tired from the technological rational order, which means also from the legal order, which itself is unhinged. It's kind of limitless gestalt. So nature risks showing its unruly side and exposing humanity to cataclysms. Struggles against such nature, or the tasks of restraining exploitation, equally lead to a severe delimitation of human sovereignty, most probably through laws, procedures that would forbid ecological violations. So there will be even more rational and police-administered law because of the natura naturans that threatens us. From the point of view of the human society, however, there is also its own nature, its internal nature, and this is embodied in the people, the demos, the constituent power. I think the democracy and the emphasis on these people also is kind of a naturalistic thinking. And here we face a dilemma again. The reduction of the demos to an instance of acclamation would render a blow to the energetic side of society. A society without an active people risks falling into apathy and hypocrisy. However, the reactualization of demos as an actual potentia absoluta always, since CES, has been understood as the power of nature in the people. That is, as nation. Nation is the same root as natura, or even race. Therefore, even though officially the doctrine of natural law was abandoned by the liberal constitution, in fact, it is still there, particularly when it comes to the sources of power. Today, the recourse to the powers of the multitude in like 80% of cases involve an identitarian nationalist politics. The people emerges not as a form-giving creative force, but as some kind of human ecological reserve that is struggling against its exploitation by the global capitalism. There is this famous eco-nationalism. The ecological discourse in the extreme right is very vivid. In France, for example, this is very strong. They're basically talking about the ecology of the French nation, of its protection against the foreigners. So this is not an entanglement that should be changed. We started this institute because we essentially see a failure of this previous model. The failure to export the liberal democratic constitution, which originally was the reason we were enthusiastic about this period, last period, and why, well, the creators of this institute actually had to flee and to move our conferences here. It's this failure of exportation which now leads to the crisis of this model, even in its stronghold, the model of liberal democracy. The contradiction between the universalism of this model, or some would say imperialism, and at the same time its suture to the sovereign nation state, moreover to a certain cultural region, the post-Christian cultural region, there is the tension here which will probably increase and might lead to the dropping of the entire model if we don't do anything. But it appears to us that Constitution itself and the Reconstitution are generally good ideas. It is within the human power to form itself, to create institutions according to reason, to constitute. In many cases, it is intellectually clear what the problem is, but there is no change ensuing from our understanding. And this is not just because no one listens to experts, actually one does, but because the experts themselves predominantly stand on the narrowly rationalistic, obsolete ideas about both nature and society. They ignore the form-giving powers of both nature and the human masses. And I also want to say a couple words about us, about the idea of the Institute. It's dedicated to the political and natural theory, to philosophy of global problems. But we cannot hide the fact that it's, the core of this institute consists of philosophers and political theories formerly from Russia. And again, this is not the subject of this conference, but anecdotally, and I think this is interesting, this is kind of the elephant in the room. This place, not this place, but the institution is, on the one hand, just, again, one more intellectual center. On the other, we believe that we bring a certain historical and generational perspective here that I would briefly summarize in two main points. First, we all come from a country with a history of widespread and intense utopianism, first cherished but then violently derided in Russia, but still remaining in the culture. And second, from a country with a tradition of predominantly affirmative, objectivistic thought, which is not that familiar in the West. Globally, there are few translations, basically no one knows anything about the Soviet thought and no one is interested. So we do have this a special angle. Take, for example, the Diamat in its distinction from the Frankfurt School. Take Alexei Losev compared to Martin Heidegger. Take Mikhail Lifshitz versus Walter Benjamin. These are all the tensions between the positive, affirmative, and the negativistic thought. In Soviet Union itself, in Russia, this often led to horrible conservatism, but also to some correct diagnosis of the negativistic nature of the Western European culture in the 20th century, which also led to the negativistic interpretation of constituent powers. The constituent multitudes are supposed to criticize, to protest all the time, and that's part of the reason why they are on decline. This in turn means that we have this special awareness of socialism and communism not only as moral values, as now there is a revival of socialism, as you know, as this kind of new leftist doctrine, old new, but it's understood morally. But we know that this is not only morality, this is a certain objective existence of certain moral values. And there are material effects to the socialist critique by intelligentsia, even when it is not meant seriously enough. Corporatism and corruption emerge where socialism is only half introduced. Communicative violence, propaganda thrives when communism is half introduced. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that we actually had our constituent moment very recently, and in this sense our history is different from the West. We lived through an epoch of enthusiasm and progress, of the actual constituent power showing itself in the 90s. Even now, when it was interrupted, we see a task of holding on to this exhilarating moment of opening, similar with many new democracies that emerged in the 80s and 90s and are mostly now finished. And this is again opposed to the popular mood of despair and apocalyptic consciousness among the intellectuals from the North. Therefore, there is a widespread tendency in the post-Soviet intelligentsia to hold on to the progress and to the West, or call it North, as a universalist entity, something that the Western intellectuals tend to deny from the now popular post-colonial perspective. Again, this is just one intellectual heritage among others, not interesting as such, but because of this catastrophe that happened in Russia now, there is a change also for a cultural dialogue, so that one small result it would be great to achieve is that our global colleagues stop identifying Russian theoretical culture with Dugin and generally with the Russian ultra-conservative tradition, which is just one of many traditions in Russia.
Hello. I would like to welcome everybody to our gathering and very much looking forward for this I hope there will be intense and wonderful days of discussion and collective thinking. I will just briefly give you two quotes from the last century, from the 20th century's thinkers. One is Artemy, already mentioned the Soviet and Russian tradition, and I would refer to Vladimir Vernadsky, one of those great minds of the early Soviet generation of scholars and scientists who combined in his knowledge different kind of perspectives and who had this global vision of what's going on the planetary scale. In 1945, and who suggested his concept of biosphere and noosphere, very influential one. In 1945, explaining what is noosphere in the journal American Scientist, was published this translation of his article. Vladimir Vernadsky writes, "The noosphere is a new geological phenomenon on our planet. In it, for the first time, man becomes a large-scale geological force. He can and must rebuild the province of his life by his work and thought, rebuild it radically in comparison with the past. Wider and wider creative possibilities open before him. It may be that the generation of our grandchildren will approach their blossoming." So today we are precisely the generation of Vernadsky's, of the generation of the grandchildren of Vernadsky's contemporaries. And the trajectory and the direction in which we are moving as a generation worldwide doesn't seem to have something common with the blossoming, but it seems that something went wrong. And what Vernadsky used to call noosphere is now received this name of Anthropocene. And in comparison to the noosphere, which had this rather positive connotations of reconstituting nature in accordance with the nous, mind, science, and progressive expectations of humankind, Anthropocene has clearly negative connotations of destroying the planet. An interesting contrast and move from one connotation to another. And one more quote is from the other generations, so generation of our fathers, of the 68 generation. And this is a quote from Guy Debord's essay, "The Sick Planet." Pollution is in fashion today exactly in the same way as revolution. So today we would say climate change is in fashion exactly in the same way as is social change. They correspond as a reality on the one hand and an expectation, a promise on the other. The reality of climate change indicates the necessity, the urge for the social change, but at the same time it's impossibility, because now we see that the Guy Debord's suggestion that the only solution for the problem of pollution is revolution does not really work. We witnessed a series of revolutions and also in the recent decades we can clearly see that something else should be taken into account, not only political, not only natural forces, but also psychological, internal and external, as Artemy would say, might be considered as a complex, as a knot which we can try to somehow disentangle, or at least approach the ways of disentangling it. Here I also stop and give a microphone to Angelina Davydova. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Oxana Timofeeva. I will be also a speaker here, and I'm a part of the Institute of the Global Reconstitution, and Angelina as well. She's our colleague. Welcome.
Good morning. Guten Morgen, schönen guten Tag, доброе утро. Thank you so much, Oxana, for this introduction, and thank you, dear colleagues, for organizing this event and inviting all of us to participate. I also represent Institute for the Global Reconstitution, IGRec. I'm one of the fellows, and I'm very happy to see so many faces here this morning, and I very much hope that within the next 2 days we'll have a very fruitful, interesting, insightful discussion on quite a number of topics. As we can see from the description of the conference, and we also have heard from what Artemy was saying, the crucial idea behind everything what we'll be talking about within the next couple of days is the word polycrisis. It's a relatively new word. It's been in wide usage for the last 3 years or so, and sometimes you see various connotations of what polycrisis is. Sometimes you see just a more of an ecological dimension, saying that polycrisis is climate change plus biodiversity crisis plus various other environmental issues. Sometimes you see polycrisis more of a holistic approach, bringing in also military conflicts, bringing in wars, bringing in questions of inequality and political failures and even pandemics. So we will try to reflect on all of these ideas within our discussions. And within our institution, since I represent more of the ecological dimension and ecological art, I'll probably make a few comments on what are we going to talk about within the nature of politics. And our conference is taking place at the intersection of political theory, the philosophy of nature, and policy analysis. And in the nature politics theme, the conference is trying to think and trying to analyze what is the connection between nature and technology, what are the alternatives of extractivism. And here I would probably also like to emphasize the argument which both Artemy and Oxana have already made, saying that, well, the Institute has already been built up with quite a few political scientists and philosophers who are in exile, originally from Russia. And obviously, Russia is one of the world's largest extractivist economies. So, in a way, our perception and also our willingness to come up in a more wider dialogue to discuss the limits of extractivism and to discuss possible ways out of the extractivism is obviously something which is of particular interest for the discussions in the next couple of days. And when I was thinking about how do I structure this conference within my mind, and especially all the environmental and extractivist questions, I almost have a feeling that we start with the analysis of the current situation. We're trying to understand what is polycrisis now and how did we get here? Like, what are the reasons behind it? Political reasons, social reasons, economic reasons, ideological reasons, philosophical reasons. We're trying to take a stance on philosophical and political reflection of it's happening. We're actually trying to track down what's happening now. And then, on a more positive note, because there's always room for some optimism and there are always some good sides even to the worst trends we observe in our societies. Also, I think, as Oxana mentioned earlier, we will also try and think of imagining ways and dreaming of the ways out of the current crisis. Once again, this is something which will take place in very intense discussions with all of you. And I do believe that everything which will be said here in this room and also outside of this room during our informal conversation will be highly interesting, highly relevant, highly useful, and will possibly try and, well, at least not solve all of the world crisis, including the polycrisis, but at least bring something, bring new thought, bring some new ideas, and also bring some new possible action, which some of us can bring into real life, real politics, real action. Thank you so much, and I wish all of us fruitful discussions during the next couple of days, and I think here we start.